So this is my last video, and so in this video we're going to look at what we have learned this semester and what you can do next, both pragmatically as a student taking classes at Ball State and in general. I addressed that a little bit in the last video, but we'll return to some of these concepts. So for this course, we've talked about different kinds of literacy. So go back to G's definition of literacy as a identity toolkit. Go back to Deborah Brandt talking about sponsors of literacy and how we gain literacy and what the people who help us gain literacy have to gain out of that. We've talked about different research methods, including some autoethnographic ones, that is, the ones where you talk about your own role in a community and your own experience, which is what you did for your literacy narrative. We've talked about some other research methods that are available, interviews, surveys, observation, etc. Of course, there's a lot of other research methods out there, but those are going to tend to be specific to your discipline, and so you'll have to learn those research methods more as you specialize. We've talked about common academic research conventions. We've talked about citations and using a style manual. We've talked about the IMRAD structure, the introduction, method, results, and discussion that is so common in research writing, where we need to convey all that information. We need to tell them, why it matters, how we did it, what the results were, and why that matters. We've talked about using bibliographies as a tool, both ordinary bibliographies and annotated bibliographies, and remember, they're not the same thing, as a tool for when you're getting started, as a proposal tool, as a tool for organizing your work while you're writing, as a tool for working on your revisions. We've talked about literature reviews and the gap, which is, how you fit your research into someone else's research and how you acknowledge all that research that you're building on top of, even if you don't have the space or the need to address any of that in detail. We've talked about the writing process and how to plan your projects. So we talked about using the bibliography as a tool. We talked about some invention techniques such as looping and free writing and clustering and outlining. We practiced last week using a sort of worksheet to fill out as one of those tools. We talked about learning your own process and things like the difference between a multi-drafter and a one-drafter and the different strategies that might appeal to them. And it's similar to having a knowledge of your own learning styles. We've talked about different research contexts. We've touched about formal research reports. We've talked about informal methods of presenting research. Certainly there's plenty of more room we could have talked about with that, but what's important here is that different kinds of research situations, just like different kinds of rhetorical situations, require different research methods, different approaches. And so we've talked about tailoring your method to your situation, both what resources you have and what your audience is expecting and what they'll consider valid. So we've talked about an awful lot, actually, in 10 weeks. Remember, we've tried to compress 15 weeks of work into 10 weeks, and it's not easy. So the question is, what next? So at the most pragmatic level, many of you still need to take the writing proficiency exam. I mentioned when we introduced the IMRAD structure that you're probably familiar with the 5-paragraph structure where you have introduction, point 1, point 2, point 3, conclusion. This is a case where the 5-paragraph essay can be very useful because that's a template that you can put your information into. So because there is a timed writing style task on the writing proficiency exam, it's very helpful to have a lot of templates in your pocket that you can use for that situation so that you can walk into that exam going, yes, I know exactly how to do the technical stuff. I just need to get the content in. Other things that you might consider that are recommendations from the department itself on their information about the exam. Consider the ways to respond. So we talked briefly about there being different ways to respond. Remember the doubting and believing game that we talked about. So you want to be able to play that doubting and believing game. So the first time you read your source, you want to be able to say, to play the believing game and genuinely look for the strengths of the argument and what it would mean if you fully accepted the argument. And then you want to be able to play the doubting game, and you want to look for the holes in the argument, any fallacies that they might use, any counter arguments that they might not have accounted for. But the other thing that you want to do is think about the 3 ways to respond. So there's yes, because, or yes, and is probably the better way to say that. Yes, and, no, because, maybe, but, where you have something in between. So you've got yes, no, and maybe. And think about those ways to respond, and think about different templates that you can use for those ways to respond. When you are in a timed writing situation, think about the writing process and how you're going to fit it into that timed writing situation. This is a case where you really need to be able to set some time aside for planning. So if I'm in an hour-long exam, I set aside at least 20 minutes for planning. I know that seems extreme, but part of that is because I'm a one draft writer in those situations. But part of it is also because I'm going to make sure that I have every piece of evidence into my outline before I do that planning. If you're a multi-draft, you might flip that. You might set 10 minutes aside and then 20 minutes at the end for revision, or whatever ratio you feel you need. So this is where you need to know your writing process, and you need to be able to have a strategy in mind even before you sit down for that exam. And that strategy should optimize what you know to be true about your writing process strengths. So also pay attention to the critical reading skills that we practiced in the bibliography and the research paper. These are the skills that they're looking for in that exam. Pay attention to argumentation. They want to know that you can identify that argument, identify its claim, identify its reasons and evidence, and that you can respond to it with a coherent argument of your own that is rooted in critical reading. That's what they're going to be looking for. So all this stuff that we've done this semester is sort of going to be on the exam, but it's, of course, done in a timed writing style, which we haven't tested. Also, another way to do this is to start thinking about where research fits into your daily life. So in the previous video, I talked about being a good citizen by being a critical reader and thinking carefully about what you yourself contribute to the ecology of information that you live in. So think about when you're making an argument to a friend and how you're providing evidence and what kind of evidence would be persuasive to them and how you're anticipating your audience based on what you know about your friend. Think about when you are making a proposal to a colleague or a superior, when maybe you want to change the way things are done and you have to make that argument and you'll need to provide some evidence. Think about when you do research for other classes. Other classes won't spend time on how to do the research. They'll just give you a topic and say, okay, do the research. So the key here is to be able to organize those projects. And maybe you have personal research projects you want to do too. How are you going to organize those? Maybe you're interested in doing genealogy. That requires a lot of organization to keep all your notes together. Maybe you just need to research what lathe you want to buy for your personal shop or something like that. All of that requires research, and all of that requires keeping your notes in some way so that you don't have to redo that research. I have a tendency to forget to take notes for informal research, like when I'm making a big purchase. Then I wind up having to do it multiple times, and it's not fun. So, think about how you're going to organize your projects and develop your own writing process. Even if you don't feel like you're a writer, do some writing practice that you're comfortable with. That could be keeping a journal. That could be regularly responding to things that you read. That could be all kinds of different ways. One of the ways I trained myself to write quickly was doing online role playing when I was in high school. So there's all kinds of different writing things that you can do that make you more comfortable. So that basically concludes the course. I want to thank you for your patience with me, and I want to thank you for your initiative. It takes so much more self-organizing to do an online course like this. Now, I also want to remind you to do your course evaluation. And I also want to remind you that if at any point you're doing research for a class or a large personal project or something, at any point in the future, that's what librarians are for. So if you're doing research for a class, go to the school library. If you're doing a personal project, go to your local public library. Librarians are there to help, and they love to help. And if you forget some research techniques that you learned in this course and you need a refresher, they're always happy to help you with that. So I hope you feel like you've learned a lot. I feel like we've covered a lot of content, and it's been an honor to be your teacher. Thank you.